Hello everyone, Mikey there, Panzernator here with a late rendition or overview of Dev Diary 28 for Man the Guns, which is an after action report courtesy of Archangel 85, which I recently learned is Gabriel. You see, when the Paradox people stream, most of the time they use their real names, and then on the Dev Diaries they obviously have their form names, but basically, so there's a after action report of a naval warfare scenario between Gabriel, who is the author and who I will be basically quoting the rest of the video, and Niall, who is one of the QA people. So Gabriel is defending the Empire of Japan's honor against Niall's filthy American imperialist. And here we go, quoting Archangel. Starting as Japan, I immediately face a number of issues that should sound very familiar. I have very limited resources, particularly in terms of oil. This is now a much bigger issue as I can still happily build ships and airplanes and tanks, but I won't be able to run them for free. However, if I want to upgrade my ships, and knowing Niall, I absolutely do, I will need naval experience, and China is unlikely to provide me with a lot of it, so I need to run training missions for my fleet, which gobbles up fuel at a rapid pace. I can only take out my main fleet units for a few brief weeks before the fuel situation became critical. So, first screenshot, looking at his fuel situation, he'll be out in 1.8 years, gains 1.1k fuel a day from the very little oil. Current fuel, he's almost at capacity, but his capacity is 430k, and consumption 1.7k a day, and his army could use up to 600 a day, not too bad. Air 1.6 a day, not too bad either. And then the Navy, currently consuming 1.7k a day, and could consume 16.7k a day. So yeah, that's not sustainable by any means, or even for a long time. So, quote, at the same time, while I could trade for more oil, it will cost civilian factories, which I desperately need to build up my own industry or to trade for steel to continue my military buildup. I decided to keep the trading for oil to a minimum in order to more quickly build up my industry and increase the size of my fleet. So we see him trading. He has a great need, and it doesn't look like he's trading for oil. So there we go with that screenshot. And quotes. My first target is, of course, China, and we start the war with them in the middle of 1937. It quickly becomes apparent that I underestimate the Chinese. Fighting rages hard along the border for several weeks, and a number of naval landings that attempt to force the AI to draw troops away from the main front are quickly contained by local garrisons, but at least not pushed back into the sea. Part of the problem is that the fleets tasked with invasion support contain some of my battleships, which eat up absurd amounts of fuel, and my attempts to turn the tide through prolific use of air support eat into my fuel supplies even more. By early 1938, we are slowly grinding forward and have managed to inflict serious casualties on the Chinese, but my fuel stockpile has shrunken to just 30 days of current use. I curtail air support to only support my main thrust and send the naval forces providing shore bombardment back to port. Progress slows, but eventually we link up with the landing forces, at least saving me from an embarrassing early defeat. The massive amounts of land XP allows me to run through the doctrine tree quite a bit faster than Niall could ever hope to. Sadly, the war in the Pacific will be fought on land. And here we have a screenshot of the spend XP to boost research. So Grand Assault, Gabriel's got 100 XP to spare, and he can boost up Grand Assault. Moving on, quotes, I would take until early 1941 for the Chinese to it would take until 1941 for the Chinese to fall, even though the writing is on the wall by the middle of 1940. I blame the poor infrastructure and awful trade in China. My leadership is, after all, beyond any reasonable doubt. In the meantime, you see typical German, always blaming things on his soldiers and generals and not on the head of state. When does that ever happen in a World War II scenario? Continuing, quote, in the meantime, Niall has been quietly modernizing his fleet and has started his rearmament. Thank you, someone, for commenting a winky face. While a good amount of his effort is spent on helping out the British in Europe, I have no doubt that he has something in store for me. While I was deeply engaged in managing the war in China, I received some out-of-game intelligence, now bragging in the kitchen that his destroyer swarms would annihilate me, that makes me realize that my fleet lacks some key capabilities. The starting Japanese light cruisers are fairly mediocre, most have been built during the 20s, and... okay, the way he writes 20s is 20 IES and not 20S, or TWENTIES. You know what? English is probably not his first language, and I can't do anything German, so let's just move on. And are not up to the task of winning a firefight against the likes of a Brooklyn-class cruiser with no less than 3 light cruiser battery modules. What I do have is a lot of torpedoes, and I invest a little into researching upgraded torpedoes and better launchers. The Japanese Long Lance National Spirit gives me another perk, as it negates the enemy screening to an extent. What he misspells, it puts extend instead of extent. Moving on, which means that my torpedoes can hit his capitals even through 100% screening. So, Long Lance torpedoes with definitely the debug tool open. So what this does, gives you National Spirit, which gives you more screen penetration. Quote, so while I was slowly grinding my way across China, I also decided on my build-up strategy. No new battleships since they eat up a lot of fuel, and I have enough to cover my carriers. However, I did later decide to build at least one Yamato class as an insurance against Nile developing modern battleships. 2. A force of 4 light carriers. Japan starts with 2 Ryuho and returning fan favorite Hosho with 2 Zuiho class battleships. While these only carry 40 airplanes each, they will be used to provide cover for operations in and around the Dutch East Indies. 3. A force of 4 carriers, 4 fleet carriers, with another force of 4 joining later. Akagi and Kaga will be joined by 2 more Soiru class carriers and form the main strike force in the Central Pacific. Next, heavy emphasis on air defense and torpedoes. After researching dual-purpose main armaments, I designed a new destroyer class with improved AA and better torpedo armament. These are joined by a quartet of light torpedo cruisers from the Imperial, from the Japanese focus. Then, lots and lots of naval bombers to damage the enemy during the approach and pick off stragglers. Once the battle is fought, his damaged ships would likely try and find a close naval base for repairs, so having naval bombers ready to attack them in port would let me finish them off. And finally, once I identified the fleet's weakness in defense against destroyers, I also designed a version of the Mogami class heavy cruiser designed to light gun support. I built another 4 of these. And here we have a screenshot of this Mogami light. It looks like he has a catapult launcher, dual purpose secondaries, I'm guessing, with the secondary and the little anti-aircraft tool, some torpedo tubes, looks like some light gun modules, AA, some good gunfire stuff, good engines, dual purpose secondaries, and armor. Continuing quote, the fleet's main objective, however, is to provide support for landings to seize resource-rich areas in the Dutch East Indies. To protect the sea lanes to and from these islands, I will need to secure the Philippines, and that is where things get a little dicey. While I have little doubt that my forces can take over Sumatra, Java, and Borneo, Malaya might be a tough nut to crack, and I know that Nile has already started to fortify the Philippines. I have researched amphibious armor well in advance, and with China now pacified, I start to turn up production in an attempt to give my Marines a bit more punch and hopefully allow me to seize a foothold even against heavy opposition. So here you got a screenshot. He's got his amphibious tank, Kitakami, a Musashi, Kagero class, and a Mogami Light. I think the Mogami Light is the one that he's using to pick off stuff. And also the Kasu, or Ka-T, I think it's Kasu, which is the basic amphibious tractor, aka motorized / mechanized but amphibious. Quote, thinking ahead, I also research improved naval bombers and the next generation of carrier planes. Once my main objectives are secured, I will use swarms of naval bombers to hold them down while I move my fleets to stage 2 and take on Australia. To give myself some more time to build up, I delay my attack on the U.S. until early 1942. This allows me to form a second strike force of 2 fleet carriers, Shokaku and Zikaku, both repeat Soryus, as I was unable to scrape together enough XP to design an upgraded carrier. The first battles are very encouraging. Whenever my patrols find one of his scouting units, my strike fleet sortie and make short work of them. Niall's vaunted destroyer swarms being no match for my upgraded cruisers and destroyers, I am somewhat confident that I can attrit his screening forces faster than he can replace them, which would eventually force his fleet to remain in port or eat absurd numbers of torpedoes. I, of course, said torpedoes. He didn't say torpedoes. Screenshot. Battle of Truck. It looks like he has numerical superiority, of course, but in the losses, 60 convoys, light cruisers, 7 destroyers to only 1 destroyer. Good job, Ishiroku Yamamoto. Nimitz, get your freaking act together. And what's with this Union Jack? Like, or the British? Why are the British like whatever? Why is it a British flag but an American commander? I don't understand. Moving on, quote, things quickly turn a little chaotic as my strike fleets and patrols intercept a number of troop convoys. While I first thought that these were going to the Philippines, they instead turn out to be trying to seize islands in the Central Pacific. Things don't go well for him, as he decided to keep his battleships and carriers on strike duty instead of covering his invasion convoys. Several divisions are effectively destroyed at sea, and the remaining fail to gain any footholds. At the same time, my invasion in the DEI, Dutch East Indies, supported by the old battleship Issei and Hyuga, have run into stiff opposition while attempting to land in Borneo. I shift some tactical bombers into the theater to help break the stalemate, and we are starting to make progress. The two-pronged assault succeeds in establishing a foothold, but it is a reminder that Niall has not been idle and is ready to fight for every inch of ground in this vital area. So, screenshot. There's a fleet, the Issei and Hyuga, and Mogami, Mikuma, Furutaka, the Furitaka, the Kaki, Oi, Tinryu, Tama, Shia. Yeah, I'm not going to read all the Japanese names. But they are on a naval invasion support and around the Dutch East Indies. More text. So, quote, while my Marines still struggle to make landfall in the Philippines, a bigger drama unfolds in the Bismarck Sea. Niall has finally unleashed his main strike force after one of his patrols found my carrier fleet. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea does not go particularly well for the Imperial Navy. With several battleships detached for minor repairs, the U.S. Navy breaks through my screening units and manages to do an end run on my carriers, sinking all 4 for no capital ship losses on their side. The survivors straggle home, many ships badly damaged during the ferocious engagement as my battle line attempt to screen against the full might of the U.S. battle fleet. So, yeah, we see heavy fire. So it looks like the Nagato has heavy fires, which is a critical hit. His repair queue, the Yamashiro, Haruna, Nagato, Hairu, Agura, yeah, just a lot of stuff dead. Sounds like the Battle of Bismarck Sea is the new Battle of Midway. So, continuing, quote, however, Niall's victory has come at a steep cost. Most of his battleships is badly damaged, it should be are badly damaged, and he has nothing to follow his success up with. More than that, I still have 6 carriers in reserve, 2 fleet, 4 light, and several hundred naval bombers scouring the Bismarck Sea, means that he has to risk his battleships again to sail them to safer harbors for repairs. Several of them take further damage as they retreat, many of them out of the battle for almost a year. So, a bunch of ships that, you know, traditionally got damaged by Japanese aviation, like the USS Nevada, USS Pennsylvania, USS Tennessee, New Mexico, Idaho, West Virginia. West Virginia actually turned out pretty decently, and then some cruisers. Moving on, quote, while Niall has blunted my offensive power quite severely, he has nothing to interfere with in my operations in the DEI, which were the main objective. Trying to use the Philippines as an unsinkable aircraft carrier has become next to impossible, as trying to supply it with fuel would cost him too many convoys and tank his war support. The Japanese conquest of the southern resource area won't quite be the lightning strike it was in history, but it is as inevitable as the rising of the sun. So here we see a screenshot of the Yamato that sunk just a bunch of destroyers, and well, that's only part of the list. Quote, with hindsight, my performance in the naval war thus far comes down to lack of radar allowing Niall to get the drop on me in a critical moment, lack of training due to fuel concerns, insufficient coverage of the sea zones with naval bombers failing to disrupt the enemy on the approach, Not enough screening vessels to protect my carriers against his battle fleet. Although Yamato sunk several ships and survived to fight another day, spending the same amount of three heavy cruisers would likely have yielded better results and good performance of my light forces when engaged on equal terms. That's all for today. Tune in, blah, blah, blah. They had another stream looking at fuel. This was before they announced the release date of February 28th, which happens to be your the birthday of your fearless leader. That would be me. So thank you, Paradox, for going for and ahead of time for releasing probably what's going to be my favorite expansion on my 24th birthday. I appreciate the kind gesture. But yeah, not a lot of new stuff in this dev diary. I wish Gabriel talked about his fuel situation during the war. Like, I don't know if he built refineries and was fine, or if he captured enough, or if he was running against the clock. I mean, it kind of sounded like at the beginning we were going to hear more about fuel, but that was not the case. Anyways, that's it for this dev diary. Again, apologies for it being over a week late, almost 2 weeks late. I'll try and get up to speed, get the achievement one to you in a couple days. But for now, that is Dev Diary 28, the after action report, which, you know, good old Gabriel and Niall fighting, Germans and Brits fighting. No, what's new? What's new, right? Anyways, hope you enjoyed it. This overview. If you did, be sure to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, follow me on Twitter, and check out my Patreon page. Thank you all so much for watching, and until the next one, this is Mikey der Panzernator signing out. See ya, nerds!